This is a great story, and the lesson it brings is incredibly valuable. Listen carefully. Eleanor and Richard Parker were at the top of the business world, wealthy, powerful, and used to getting everything their way. But one fateful evening at a luxurious restaurant, their arrogance and prejudice led them to mistreat a young black woman, believing she was beneath them. What they didn't know was that fate had a lesson in store for them, one that would bring their empire crashing down in the most unexpected way. Stay with us until the end, because this story proves that karma never forgets. Hi everyone, welcome to Narrated Tales, where every story touches the heart. Today I am very happy to share a new story with you. Let's get started. The chandeliers in Le Chateau, one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city, sparkled like scattered diamonds. The atmosphere was a blend of sophistication and quiet indulgence. Soft classical music played in the background, complementing the muted conversations of wealthy patrons sipping fine wine and savoring gourmet dishes. At a corner table, near the tall, gleaming windows overlooking the city skyline, Eleanor and Richard Parker took their seats. They were a power couple, both sharp in business, ruthless in negotiations, and always dressed in the finest designer clothing. Tonight was no different. Eleanor, her blonde hair pulled into an elegant bun, wore a sleek black evening dress with an emerald necklace that caught the candlelight. Richard, dressed in an expensive charcoal gray suit, adjusted his cufflinks as they settled in. "Another successful deal closed today," Richard murmured, reaching for the wine menu. "We're expanding faster than I expected." Eleanor smiled smugly, glancing around the restaurant as if to ensure everyone noticed their presence. "Of course we are," she said. "You and I built this empire. It's only natural that we dominate." Just as they were about to order, the door of the restaurant swung open, and a young black woman entered, walking confidently toward a table beside them. She was dressed in an elegant but modest cream-colored blouse tucked into high-waisted navy trousers. Her hair was styled into soft curls that framed her smooth dark skin. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her posture straight and composed. As she sat down, she briefly glanced at Eleanor and Richard before picking up the menu. Her expression was unreadable, calm but detached. Eleanor's smile immediately faded. She turned toward Richard, her eyebrows knitting together. "Can you believe this?" she whispered, leaning slightly toward him. "This is supposed to be an exclusive restaurant." Richard, more preoccupied with selecting a wine, barely glanced at the woman. Eleanor's lips thinned in annoyance. "I'm saying people like her don't belong here." Richard finally looked up, taking a quick glance at the woman. He shrugged. "She looks decent enough. Don't let it bother you." "Don't let it bother me," Eleanor scoffed. "I don't pay for a premium dining experience to sit next to someone like that." Richard sighed, then asked them to move her. That was all Eleanor needed to hear. With a flick of her manicured fingers, she gestured toward Mark Evans, their assigned waiter for the evening. Mark had been working at Le Chateau for years. A well-mannered and respectful man in his early 40s, he prided himself on treating every guest with dignity and professionalism. "Yes, ma'am," Mark said, his tone polite as he approached their table. Eleanor barely looked at him, instead tilting her chin toward the young black woman. "I'd like to request that she be moved to another table." Mark's brows furrowed slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but all guests are seated according to availability. If she has a reservation, she has every right to sit there." Eleanor's eyes flashed with irritation. "I'm not asking whether she has the right to sit there. I'm telling you that I don't want her sitting next to us." Mark's jaw tightened slightly, but his professional demeanor remained intact. "Ma'am, we do not discriminate against guests. If you are unhappy with the seating arrangement, I can check for another available table for you and your husband." Eleanor's fingers curled around her wine glass as frustration bubbled inside her. "Unbelievable," she muttered. Richard, who had been silent up until now, sighed heavily, setting down the menu. "Look, let's not make a scene. Just call your manager and let them decide." Mark gave a brief nod. "Of course, sir." As he walked away, Eleanor crossed her arms. "I can't believe the nerve of that waiter. Since when do employees think they can talk back like that?" Richard rubbed his temple, already regretting agreeing to this. "Eleanor, drop it. We're here to eat, not start a crusade." At the next table, the young woman overheard everything. She didn't react, didn't even glance in their direction. Instead, she calmly folded her menu and looked up just as Mark returned. Miss, I apologize for any discomfort, Mark said, lowering his voice slightly so that only she could hear. Would you like me to move you to another seat? The woman finally met his gaze, her expression composed but knowing. I don't want to cause trouble, she said softly. Mark nodded with understanding. I respect your decision. As she picked up her belongings and moved to a table further away, Eleanor smirked in satisfaction. Finally, she muttered. Mark gritted his teeth but said nothing. He simply returned to his duties, his respect for Eleanor and Richard now tainted by disappointment. The evening continued without further incident, but as the young woman ate at her new table, a small, knowing smile played at the corner of her lips. She had seen people like Eleanor before. She had also seen where people like Eleanor ended up, and fate had a funny way of humbling the arrogant. A week had passed since Eleanor and Richard's unpleasant encounter at Le Chateau. The incident had long slipped from their minds, buried beneath their usual routine of business deals, financial negotiations, and corporate dinners. Tonight, however, was different. The couple arrived at the restaurant once again, dressed in their finest attire, but this time with a purpose far greater than just dinner. They were meeting a key business associate, Daniel Carter, to finalize a contract that would expand their company's reach internationally. Eleanor adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist as Richard pulled out her chair. The restaurant was buzzing with quiet conversations, elegant diners enjoying their expensive meals under the soft golden light of the chandeliers. I can't wait to close this deal, Eleanor murmured, glancing around impatiently. This will secure our dominance in the industry for years. Richard nodded, signaling for the waiter to bring their usual bottle of wine. Carter's company is the perfect partner. With their backing, we'll have international distribution in no time. Just then, Daniel Carter entered the restaurant, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was a man in his early 40s, with sharp business acumen and an air of quiet authority. He approached their table with a confident stride, flashing a courteous smile. Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, Daniel greeted as he took his seat. I hope I haven't kept you waiting. Not at all, Richard said smoothly. We were just discussing how excited we are to move forward with this partnership. Eleanor signaled for the waiter to bring menus, then turned to Daniel with a warm, businesslike smile. Let's not waste any time. Shall we discuss the final terms? Daniel nodded, pulling out a sleek leather folder and placing a contract document on the table. The conversation quickly shifted to numbers, logistics, and agreements. The three of them toasted to success, and within the hour the deal was officially signed. As the ink dried on the contract, Eleanor leaned back with a satisfied sigh. This will be a defining moment for our company, she said, exchanging a pleased glance with Richard. Daniel chuckled, clinking his glass against theirs. I have no doubt that this partnership will be mutually beneficial. The evening ended on a high note, and as Eleanor and Richard left the restaurant, they walked taller, prouder, believing they had secured an unshakable future. They had no idea how quickly their fortunes would change. What started as a minor issue quickly snowballed into a full-blown catastrophe. It began with a few customer complaints, product malfunctions, safety concerns, dissatisfaction with quality. Then came the supply chain issues, shipment rejections and delays that cost them millions. One by one, partners withdrew, their confidence in the Parker company shattered. Eleanor and Richard, once untouchable, were now scrambling to keep their empire from crumbling. We need to do damage control, Richard growled, pacing in his office, his jaw tight with stress. If we don't get another contract signed soon, we'll lose everything. Eleanor, sitting at her desk, fingers digging into her temples, forced herself to think logically. Daniel Carter, he's our best bet. Richard nodded immediately. We already have a relationship with his company. If we can renegotiate a new deal, we might be able to recover. Eleanor exhaled sharply. Then let's arrange a meeting, somewhere familiar. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Le Chateau? Eleanor smiled slightly. Exactly. Let's remind him of the luxury of doing business with us. A call was made. The meeting was set. The Parker company's future now rested on this dinner. On the night of the meeting, Eleanor and Richard entered Le Chateau once again. But this time, their usual air of confidence was clouded with quiet desperation. The restaurant looked unchanged, still glittering with elegance and wealth. But to them, the atmosphere felt heavier, perhaps because they had too much to lose. Eleanor clutched her designer handbag tightly as they approached their usual table, scanning the restaurant for Daniel Carter. And then, a familiar figure caught her eye. At a table nearby, the same young black woman from weeks ago sat, her posture as poised as ever. She was dressed in a sleek, white satin blouse and a tailored navy blue blazer, exuding the quiet elegance of someone in command of any room she entered. Eleanor's lips pursed in distaste. Richard noticed her tense expression and followed her gaze. His own features darkened as he recognized the woman. "She's here again?" Eleanor muttered, barely concealing her irritation. Richard sighed. "Ignore it. We have bigger concerns tonight." Before Eleanor could say another word, the restaurant doors swung open. Daniel Carter entered, just as planned. Eleanor and Richard stood up, ready to greet him. But then, something unexpected happened. Daniel didn't walk directly to their table. Instead, he turned toward the young black woman and bowed respectfully. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Richard froze. And then, the final devastating blow landed. Daniel handed the woman a folder of documents and addressed her with clear reverence. "Miss Williams," he said, "everything has been prepared as per your instructions." Eleanor and Richard felt the ground beneath them shift. Their business associate, the man they had relied on to save their company, was standing before this woman like an obedient employee. And then it hit them. Amara Williams. The same woman they had dismissed, the same woman Eleanor had insisted be moved away from them during their last visit. She was not just another guest at the restaurant. She was the CEO of Carter's Corporation. She was the true authority behind the deal they had once signed. She was the woman who now held their company's fate in her hands. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her pulse thundering in her ears. Richard's face went pale, his mouth parting slightly in disbelief. Amara finally turned her gaze toward them, and in her calm, knowing expression, they saw everything. The moment of recognition, the silent judgment, and worst of all, the complete absence of surprise, as if she had known this moment was coming all along. Eleanor's knees felt weak. Richard's hands curled into tight fists. Neither of them spoke. Because what could they say? They had revealed their true colors that night weeks ago, and now fate had brought them full circle. A heavy silence fell over the table. The weight of the moment pressed down on Eleanor and Richard, rendering them speechless. Their arrogance, their prejudice, their entitlement, everything had led to this moment of reckoning. Amara Williams, the same woman Eleanor had deemed unworthy of sharing a space with, now sat before them as the most powerful person in the room. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Eleanor, struggling to regain her composure, forced a smile and let out a nervous laugh. "Miss Williams," she said, her voice tight, "this is quite a surprise." Amara simply tilted her head, watching Eleanor with an unreadable expression. Richard, still in shock, straightened his posture and cleared his throat. "We had no idea that you were—" He paused, carefully choosing his words. "Involved with Carter's company." Daniel Carter gave them both a pointed look, then turned back to Amara. "Would you like to proceed with business, Miss Williams?" he asked, completely ignoring Eleanor and Richard's attempt at conversation. Amara, who had remained calm and composed throughout the entire encounter, finally spoke. "Actually," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate, "I believe we have unfinished business to discuss." Eleanor felt a bead of sweat form at her temple. Her instincts screamed at her to fix this, fast. "Miss Williams," she started, her voice overly polite, "I think we may have had some misunderstandings in the past." Amara arched an eyebrow. "Misunderstandings?" Eleanor let out another forced laugh. "Yes, of course. You see, people sometimes make rash judgments, and I'd hate for anything that may have happened before to affect our professional relationship now." Amara studied Eleanor carefully, her eyes betraying nothing. "You mean," Amara said slowly and clearly, "you'd hate for your past actions to affect your financial stability now?" Eleanor's smile faltered. Richard, sensing the situation slipping from their grasp, interjected quickly. "Miss Williams, we have always respected our business partners. If there was ever a moment where we acted inappropriately, please understand it wasn't personal." Amara's lips curled into the slightest smirk. "Oh, but it was personal," she said. The sharpness of her words made Eleanor flinch. "The way you looked at me," Amara continued, her voice steady, "the way you spoke to that waiter, That wasn't just business, Mrs. Parker. That was who you are. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest. This was slipping beyond her control, and she knew it. Miss Williams, please, she said, lowering her voice as if that would make a difference. Amara lifted a hand, silencing her. I don't believe in second chances for people who only apologize when they need something, Amara said, her tone final, unyielding. Richard, his desperation now evident, leaned forward. Miss Williams, I assure you, our company is more than capable of recovering from this crisis. If you just consider giving us a second chance, Amara slowly shook her head. There won't be another contract, she said simply. The words hit like a thunderclap. Eleanor felt the color drain from her face. Richard's fingers tightened around his glass, his breathing becoming labored. Miss Williams, Eleanor tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, we're going to lose everything. Amara gave them a long, measured look. Eleanor saw no hatred in her expression, no satisfaction, no cruelty, just absolute indifference. That, Amara said, is not my problem. Eleanor opened her mouth, but no words came. Richard sank back into his chair, his face blank. Daniel Carter stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. Thank you for your time, Mr. and Mrs. Parker. I'll let my assistant handle the formal withdrawal of our partnership. Eleanor watched, helpless as Amara and Daniel walked away. It was over. Their lifeline was gone, and so was everything they had worked for. The fall of the Parker Company happened faster than anyone had predicted. With the loss of Carter's partnership, other investors backed out, wary of being tied to a sinking ship. Suppliers cut ties, lawsuits from dissatisfied clients piled up, and within 6 months, the company that Eleanor and Richard had boasted about for years was bankrupt. Eleanor's social status crumbled just as quickly. She and Richard went from high society elites to whispers in the shadows. A cautionary tale of arrogance leading to downfall. The same exclusive restaurants that once greeted them with warmth now treated them as mere customers. The same business partners who once sought their approval now refused to acknowledge them. And worst of all, the same waiter they had tried to humiliate, Mark Evans, was now working as the floor manager at Le Chateau. Eleanor and Richard avoided the restaurant entirely after their downfall. They couldn't bear the humiliation. But fate had one last lesson for them. It had been 12 months since their empire collapsed. Eleanor and Richard, once owners of a multi-million-dollar business, were now struggling to maintain their lifestyle. One evening, after an exhausting meeting with a small investor who wasn't interested in reviving their business, Eleanor found herself wandering the streets, lost, frustrated, bitter. She hadn't realized where she was walking until she stopped in front of Le Chateau. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't stepped foot in this place since that night. Before she could turn away, the door swung open, and out stepped Amara Williams. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Amara's eyes met hers, but instead of hostility, there was nothing. No anger, no malice, no interest. Just a brief glance before Amara walked past her, as if she were just another stranger on the street. That was the final blow. Eleanor had expected gloating, satisfaction, some form of acknowledgement that they had lost, and Amara had won. But the true punishment was being completely ignored. She no longer mattered. Her status, her wealth, her power, it had all been an illusion. And now, she was nothing more than a forgotten name in a world that had moved on without her. As she stood there frozen, Richard finally caught up to her. Come on, Eleanor, he muttered, his voice lacking the arrogance it once held. Let's go. Eleanor tore her gaze away from the restaurant, swallowed the last remnants of her pride, and followed her husband into the night. She had learned the lesson too late, but karma had not forgotten. This story is a powerful reminder that arrogance, prejudice, and entitlement can lead to one's downfall. Eleanor and Richard Parker believed their wealth made them superior, but karma had other plans. Their disrespect toward Amara Williams, a woman they dismissed without a second thought, ultimately cost them everything. This story teaches us that kindness, humility, and respect for others are far more valuable than wealth and status. Success should be built on integrity, not arrogance, because in the end, fate has a way of balancing the scales. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Have you ever seen a moment where karma delivered justice? Share your thoughts We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story. Stay humble, stay kind.